Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Scaling Secrets. And today we're going to cover a topic that I get asked about all the time, which is about, why can't we just increase budget and scale, right? Have brands that are like, we're not scaling fast enough. We could just bump the budget. And the reason why this is a horrible idea is most of the time you're going to mess up the algorithm without getting you the results that you want, right? So people think that if you spend more, you're going to necessarily make more, even if the ROAS is a little bit less. Now, that's absolutely not true. I've had instances where, let's just say we're getting a 4 or 5x ROAS, and then we increase the spend, and not only is the ROAS lower, but the revenue is not even higher, right? And so essentially, what you want to do instead is only increase budget 10 to 20% for every 5 to 7 days max. Again, you could go the fastest, we could go as 4 days, maybe three if it's a period of massive demand. But like I said, you don't want to just increase the budget massively because it's a massive risk. And again, there's many factors that you really want to consider when it comes to that, right? So yeah, basically smart bidding uses machine learning to optimize bids. And so when you have such a drastic change, whether in budget or bidding, Google starts having to target broader audiences, which means that now, whatever was working in the past isn't necessarily going to keep working based on in terms of your ROAS and your overall performance, right? And so what might happen is you actually end up wasting so much time because you're going to take a long time for the algorithm to readjust. And so you end up wasting, 2 to 3 weeks of bad performance rather than just scaling, slowly but surely, right? And so again, this is super tempting for a lot of people. I understand that. You see that you just want to, take the risk and increase the campaign budget. But I'm telling you right now, that is not what you want. What happens when you, let's say, double the budget? So will the CPA in most cases, right? And so what's going to happen is you're going to have a big drop of ROAS for usually about a week or even longer, right? Until it stabilizes. And then what happens is the algorithm is going to get into another learning phase, which is going to require a lot of conversions to kind of recalibrate that, right? And so again, you're going to have more clicks, more impressions, but it doesn't mean necessarily, conversions that match up to it. And so what happens is when you actually keep the budget change to 20% or less, the algorithm actually doesn't reset necessarily. And so you're able to really maintain the performance to a large degree. Okay. So here's actually a client example from the last 30 days. So the first example, we actually scaled pretty aggressively. So you can see that we've more than doubled the cost within 30 days, right? And so here, there's actually an exception to the rule, and that's what I wanted to get into because there's always exceptions to everything in life. So I'm not showing this here, but we had a look at the search impression share lost due to budget, and that was pretty big, right? And so when that column, is showing you a large percentage, it's something to really take into consideration. So basically what was happening here was we had a certain, percentage of search impression share. However, we had a lot of potential to hit much higher impression share if we would increase the budget. So we increased the budget at once a lot more than 20%. And again, the great thing about it was that the ROAS we were achieving was so high that we could actually take such a risk. And so even when it reduced, it's still above the target, which is 2x, right? Another thing as well was that we actually had to wait a decent amount of time, which we could afford for this campaign, right? A lot of examples you can't really afford to mess up. And so that's why I wouldn't normally take this approach. But for this campaign here, the first week or 10 days, the ROAS had actually dropped significantly and revenue was not looking good. But I told the client to actually wait, let's actually see how the algorithm adjusts. And it did so wonderful. Okay. Now, for the second example, you can see here, it was a much nicer, more smoother scaling operation. So you can see that we've actually increased budget by 25%. and the revenue increased by about 40%. Okay. And so that was a lot more smoother via the usual, scaling operation. Okay. And that's just a simple example of just increasing by 10% and how it accumulates overall percentage increase, okay, based on, right? And so that allows you to about almost double your budget in about 8 weeks, okay? So first thing you want to do if you want to start increasing budget, you want to obviously make sure if performance is good, right? Because if the ROAS target isn't being hit, then or it's not at least at the target or above target for at least 14 days, if not more, then you don't want to do that, right? You can't just increase after a couple of good days, right? You also want to make sure that you want to look at the impression share loss to budget, okay? Because if that number is pretty low, then budget is not really your focus, okay? Then, as I mentioned, you want to really increase buy list start testing by 10 to 15%. And then you want to give it a clean week at least, okay? Because there's going to be fluctuations. You don't want to judge based on 1 or 2 days. You want to give it 1 week at least to be able to judge. And so essentially what you want to do, as I mentioned, is really stack up the scaling. So you want to do maybe 10, 20% every 7 days. And if performance backs out, you keep increasing. So what are some of the biggest mistakes when it comes to scaling, right? So obviously, as I mentioned, doubling budget overnight is never a good idea. Scaling and changing bid strategy, you'd never want to do that because two variables, you're going to super confuse the algorithm. It doesn't like that, okay? Scaling a campaign that's not profitable, scaling during learning phase, and making daily adjustments. Never do that, okay? For obvious reasons. And so at what point does it not make sense to just keep increasing budget, right? So here are some of the key sort of signals that you can get that tell you that increasing budget won't really do much at this point. So if your ROAS is declining despite you scaling very slow and doing everything right, that means again could be an audience issue, could be ad fatigue. So you want to look at optimizing your ads, looking at adding new asset groups, refreshing creatives, new product segments, launching new campaigns. When it comes to increasing CPCs, then that means there's a rise of competition. Again, you want to really diversify your campaign types. If you're having 90 plus impression share, that means congratulations. You have all the impressions you want, but again, increasing budget isn't necessarily going to help. Or if you have low volume, which means you really need to broaden your audience, okay? So yeah, with that being said, hope you got any kind of value from today. And so with that being said, if you want to save yourself this entire headache, have us manage your Google ads while you chill on a beach in Greece and yeah, hit 100K revenue months or 500K or more, depending on where you're at. Feel free to reach out and I'll happily take a look. We have some of the best systems in the market.